join us in this Google Hangout World Cup plus Climate plus Social Good. We are going to discuss a little bit about the impacts of climate change on the Amazon forest, and then discuss a little bit about the solutions, the sustainable options we have to this big, huge forest. I think the first thing we have to introduce ourselves, and I'm a reporter of the Brazilian newspaper Valor Econômico, and I'm covering environmental issues from 20 years from now, and I'm 10 years in Valor Econômico, trying to cover climate change aspects and international negotiations at the UN and the IPCC and these kind of things. And here are my colleagues in this Google Hangout. And so please introduce yourself. Maybe we can start with Fabio.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Daniela, Paulo, Carlos, a pleasure to be in this chat with you guys and everybody who is watching us. I'm Fabio Carlos. I'm Senior Vice President for the Americas Division of Conservation International, and I'm also a professor in the Ecology Department of the Federal University of Rio. And during the past 4 years, I was working in the IPCC, in the chapter for impact adaptation vulnerability of Central and South America. And looking forward to our discussion here.
Thank you, Fabio. Maybe Professor Paul Artacho, could you please introduce yourself?
Hello. Yeah, hello to everybody. So I'm Paulo Artacho, Professor of Physics in the University of São Paulo. So I worked for many years on the large-scale biosphere-atmosphere experiment in Amazonia, the LBA experiment, and also I work with the two latest releases of the IPCC report, AR4 and AR5, and I work on effects of climate change on Amazonia. So, hello to everybody.
Hello, thank you, Professor. And now, Carlos Rito, please, if you can introduce yourself.
Hello, Daniela, Paulo, Fabio, and everyone. And thank you for the invitation to join you at this Google Hangout. I'm Carlos Rito, Executive Secretary for the Climate Observatory, which is a network of Brazilian NGOs and social movements working on climate agenda in the country. I'm glad to be with you and look forward for the discussions and the questions that could come out.
Thank you, Carlos. Maybe we can talk a little bit now about an overlook of the problem and the threats that the the forest is suffering with climate change. And maybe Professor Paul Artacho could start telling us a little bit what is the severity of this situation of climate change and the impacts over the forest.
Yeah, I could start this very important and strategic discussion for Brazil, and not just for Brazil, for the whole world. So basically, Brazil have deforested in between 17 to 18% of the original area of the forest. And this, of course, when you change the forest to a pasture area or even to abandoned or secondary forest, a lot of changes happens in the functioning of the ecosystem, including its ability to emit aerosol particles, trace gases like critical gases that are essential for the functioning of the ecosystem, also influences the way clouds are formed and how precipitation develops. So basically, these are major changes that up to now have happened for only a small fraction, relatively small fraction of Amazonia, and the challenge now is to keep deforestation as low as it was in the last 2-3 years, but that will not be an easy task because it will require a lot of new public policies to keep deforestation rates in Amazonia very low, or even bring deforestation to zero. That would be ideal for Brazil and for the world.
Thank you, Professor. Maybe Fabio, could you add something to the trees of the forest by now?
Yes, thank you. And to add to what Paulo has covered, you know, Brazil has 60% of the area of the Amazon. So, and of course, Brazil has made a lot of progress in reducing deforestation. But the thing is that as Brazil improves its monitoring and enforcement of legislation so as to keep deforestation low, sometimes that pushes the problem across the border a little bit into other countries or other areas where legislation or enforcement is not as strong as it is here. So as a result, we have countries like Peru and Bolivia, for instance, that are beginning to have pretty high deforestation rates across the border. So in my view, one of the problems... Sorry? Yes,
you are mentioning a leakage problem, isn't it?
That's right, yeah. And I think that's one of the big problems in the region right now. It's not going to be enough to make sure that the Brazilian Amazon is protected. We have to make sure that deforestation reduces in all 8 Amazonian countries, plus the French territory, French Guyana. And that requires a lot of diplomatic work and diplomatic engagement between the various Amazonian countries to do so in a cohesive, coherent manner.
Okay, thank you, Fabio. Carlos, would you like to comment something on that? Carlos Brito?
Yes, thank you, Daniela. Well, we are now seeing for a new flood season in the Amazon with high floods over different regions. It's starting in Bolivia and Western Amazon and now going down the river. Have been passed through the states of Acre and Rondônia, Amazonas, and soon reaching the state of Tapajós. And according, Professor Artacho, you can correct me, but according to the results for working group 2, it's recognized that the 2 severe droughts that we had in this last decade in the Amazon could be connected to climate change, and so it's clear that the Amazon is potentially very highly vulnerable to climate change, not only the changes in the patterns of temperature and humidity, but also on the impacts coming from the extreme weather events. We know that even a slight raise in temperature could represent a much higher increase in temperature in the Amazon region. That this could represent a huge threat for the biodiversity and ecosystem services, and so also to the livelihoods of local people. But adding to that the potential higher frequency and higher intensity of extreme weather events that could result in even higher threats.
Okay, thank you, Carlos. Professor Paulo, could we, Carlos was mentioning these intense droughts and the floods that we have in the Amazon now. How can we connect these things with this phenomena, with the climate change, can we connect? Can we make a relation? It's other.
So basically, the issue is that we have the 2 most strong droughts in Amazonia in the last 10 years from the whole last century. But basically, to attribute individual events, to climate change, statistically, it's very difficult because you have only 1 or 2 events in hundreds of other events. However, what we observe is that there is an overall increase in climate extremes, amount of droughts, amount of floods, amount of strong tornadoes like we saw in the United States recently, and so on. So basically the weather overall is going to extreme. But now to identify individual events, one particular drought or the drought in the southern part of Brazil right now to climate change is difficult. We needed to wait for another 10 or 20 years to make absolutely sure that statistically this is a valid affirmation. However, we needed to work on a precarious way. I mean, we have to look at the possibility that this drought could be more frequent. They release a tremendous amount of carbon to the overall atmosphere, so they feed back positively on global climate change. And this, of course, is something that you have to worry about, because Amazonia has one very, very large reservoir of carbon. And even small changes, 1 or 5% of this carbon is mobilized to the atmosphere. It can make the issue of greenhouse effects even more severe than we have right now. So basically, you have to take a closer look on these extreme events that are happening this particular year. Again, we are getting one of the highest floods in Amazonia. We saw that the Madeira River now arriving for the Manaus city. So basically, this is something that you have to include in the public policies to prevent these extreme events happen more frequently.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Maybe, Fabio, maybe we can discuss a little bit now about the types of activities that are impacting the Amazon the most. So how can these be replaced with more eco-friendly alternative, or a little bit about the work you are doing in your organization?
Yeah, well, I think that some of the impacts in threats that the region faces, they are very much related to the need for infrastructural expansion, and that includes energy generation and designing and implementation of roads for transport, and also food production with agriculture. So I think that these drivers, I think that the main issue is that we have to have a few numbers in mind, I think, and there has to be some strategic planning regarding how these activities can and should expand in the region, if and when and where. And basically what we see is that nearly half of the Amazon is within protected areas. And as Professor Paulo mentioned, very close to 20% of the Amazon has been deforested by now. So that leaves basically 30% of the Amazon as area that's, let's say, it's up for grabs. So how this 30% is going to be looking like into the next few years is going to be decisive, I think, in terms of climate change. As you guys know, there's a theory that came out in the assessment report number 4 of JPCC. It came up again in the assessment report 5 about the tipping points of the Amazon. So there are different papers published out there that argue that that 20%, if 20% of the Amazon gets deforested, we might enter a savannization age where conditions get drier in the Amazon. And if so happens, that's going to have major impacts in global climate as a whole, including productivity of agriculture in Latin America. There are some more recent papers that argue that perhaps this tipping point is not at 20%, it's perhaps at 30%. But either way, fact is that if the 30% of land in the Amazon, and that including Brazil and other countries in the region, if this 30% that's up for grabs, if all that's transformed into infrastructure, energy generation, agriculture, and so on, we are going to go beyond this limit, beyond this tipping point. And this can be pretty dangerous to the Amazon. And that's why, in my view, planning of infrastructure expansion, and I do agree, infrastructure expansion is very much needed in terms of having more roads, in terms of energy generation. But the way this is done, where it's done, and to which extent, is what I think requires a lot of more of integrated planning than we currently have. We have seen recently all the issues with the Belo Monte Dam, and we now have a very big issue that people are not talking about yet as much as we should, perhaps, which I think is the Tapajós dams in Brazil. There's a plan for building many of those, about 17 of those at least. Last year, prior to, or actually a couple of years ago, prior to the Rio Plus 20 meeting, the design and size of 3 protected areas in the Amazon, of actually 7 protected areas in the Amazon were changed, they were reduced, so as to build 3 hydro dams in the Tapajós River. To which extent this model of energy generation is that much necessary? To which extent our problem is less with generation and more with transmission, for instance, and what we should do in that sense to reduce loss of area of natural area in the Amazon, I think is one of the big issues that have to be discussed soon.
Thank you, Fabio. You are mentioning some very, very critical and crucial points in this discussion. I don't know if somebody, Carlos or the Professor Paulo, if you want to add something about what Fabio was telling us, and the discussion about the tipping points of the forest with the impacts of climate change. Carlos, do you want to add something? Do you want to, or the Professor Paulo?
If I can start, Professor Paul, it seems to me that what we are raising here a series of ingredients of what looks like a very very important element for thinking about the future development of the Amazon. If from one side the agriculture, cattle ranching, infrastructure expansion are drivers or can be drivers of deforestation to the Amazon, all those activities, especially agriculture and infrastructure, are also vulnerable to climate change. And so we could, and we can see in many areas a sort of some vicious cycles going on where the local climate is affected by the loss of forests, but in terms of the future and considering how the climate could look like in the future in the region, all those activities will be severely or could be severely affected by climate change. Let's think about infrastructure, what has been mentioned by Paul, by Fabio right now. No one could think that a hydro dam in the Amazon could have to be stopped when you have excess of water to run the power plant. This just happened in Rondônia, in the hydro dams that we have there. They had to stop because due to the excess of waters, due to the high level of the rivers, and if in a high flood year we are seeing that, we also can expect that to happen in the future when we have new severe droughts, and so the same is we could expect in terms of the agriculture expansion in the region. It will be affected by the change that we can face on the patterns of temperature and the patterns of rainfall in the region, and so we need to consider to take all those elements into the discussion of what is the best model of the development that we want to have in the region. It's critical. No one expects to put a dome over the region and to protect or to not cut any new tree in the region, but we might consider that we have all the elements right now which are enough to enable us to discuss and to think about best models of development for the region, because right now what we are doing is just going and increasing the levels of stress that could come in the very near future.
Okay, Carlos, thank you very much. Maybe I want to come in a few minutes to discuss a little bit these models of developments for the region. But maybe Professor Paulo Tacho wants to add something else about the last IPCC studies about the forest. And
yeah,
there was some controversial and.
Yeah, I want to comment on the issue of Fabio, because the problem is that
yes.
In this point of view, what Amazonia needs is governance. What you mean exactly by
governance?
that? It's not an issue of stopping all infrastructure or dam construction in Amazonia, but you need to do it right. And the question is, who decides what's right? Who profits from the benefits? And who suffers, from the damage, the environmental damages? Because it's obvious that any big infrastructure construction in Amazonia, like Belo Monte, we have people that will get something from it, and other people that will lose. We need a governance to decide and to intermediate all these different interests. Professor Goldenberg always says that. He is not against hydroelectric power in Amazonia. What he's against is this to be decided by the big construction companies and not by the Brazilian society as a whole. So basically, the government needs to intermediate this discussion on governance with all sectors involved and get a compromise to minimize the environmental and socioeconomic damages. I think this is the critical point, not let's stop to construct everything in Amazonia, let's keep Amazonia as an international reserve for the future of humanity and so on, because this will certainly not work out. But we certainly need a new model of development where we could profit more and minimizing the damage from environment, from social and economic issues.
Thank you, Professor Paulo. Maybe now we could discuss a little bit more about this, about the way of develop the forest, and because there are, as far as I know, there are around 30 million people living there in cities and in the forest, and we could maybe talk a little bit about energy problems. And Professor Paul mentioned who is suffering more. So I don't know if Fabio would like to mention a little bit the impacts on over the people and indigenous groups and people that lives, the community that lives near the rivers, and please.
Okay, so I think. Well, that's a long topic, but I think I could start by saying that when we think of climate change, the most vulnerable, and that comes out very clearly in all IPCC reports, the most vulnerable are the poor people, right? And we have quite a bit of poor people in the Amazon, be it in the forest, be it in some of the big cities, such as Manaus, for instance. And also, our resilience to climate change is well known, is going to be higher if we manage to protect nature. So nature well protected is very important to reduce society vulnerability to climate change. So basically, what
Why that, Fabio?
Sorry?
Why are you saying that?
Well,
that nature is very important.
We need biodiversity, forests, vegetation, animals, to make sure that the flow of ecosystem services continues to take place in quantity and quality. That means to have water in quantity and quality, we need to have vegetation cover. In order to have a climate that's stable, that keeps us away from extremes, we need to have nature protected. So if we lose, I mean, if you get any of the big cities where there's not so much nature left, we tend to have climate extremes. Pick Rio and São Paulo, it's a lot hotter in the middle of the buildings than it is outside. So we need pollinators for agriculture. If we lose the cerrado in the agricultural areas, we're going to have less and less pollinators. We have places in the world where people actually have to buy bees, to buy and import bees to make sure that some pollination takes place. So that's why maintaining a natural cover of vegetation is essential to make sure that we adapt to climate change. So if on the one hand, the poor are the most vulnerable, we need to reduce poverty, to reduce vulnerability to climate change. And at the same time, we need to protect nature. Now, the whole development model of the planet is one that we build wealth by destroying nature, right? That's what happened historically. We need to cut nature down to put something else in its place to make wealth. That's what the world knows as development. Sustainable development is another paradigm. It avoids, supposed to try to avoid this destruction, protect nature as much as possible, and reduce poverty. So for the Amazon, I'm pretty sure that the best model is one that combines nature standing and wealth generation. And I see in the Amazon different models that I won't call them models, but there are different experiences that stand out there. If we look at the Brazilian Amazon alone, you pick the case of the Amazonas state. More than half of the Amazonas state is protected, right? Is within protected areas and indigenous territories. But they have a city, that's Manaus. Manaus has more than 2 million inhabitants and is the 4th GDP in Brazil among all capitals. So Manaus produces economy, produces wealth. Now it would be ideal if the money that's generated in Manaus could be spread towards countryside state of Amazonas to make sure that communities there can live away from poverty, can live well, can be educated, can have access to health, to food, and so on. So that's one model. Manaus nowadays concentrates nearly 10% of the population of the Amazon as a whole. So you have one big city generating economy, and then people can live well in the countryside. That's one model. You pick another model, state of Amapá. 73% of the state of Amapá is within protected areas. And if you look at the Human Development Index of Amapá, it's been growing since 2003. There is production of natural products, there's açaí, there's castanha, there's a little bit of agriculture in the Araguari Basin. That's another model. You pick a third model, Acre. Acre is a forest state. There's a lot of forest protected, but there's generation of wealth out of these forests, and there's good protection. So these are three very different models. They still have a long way to go in order to be able to call them models, but these are different experiences, and I think that a combination of those and spreading these different ideas and these different strategies to other parts of the Amazon can be successful to make sure that we have no poverty in the Amazon and that nature keeps standing at least at a rate of 80% of it.
Thank you, Fabio. Carlos, what do you think about what Fabio was mentioning? You have a background working with Greenpeace and WWF and working in the Amazon as well. And so you have seen a lot of what Fabio is mentioning. Maybe you would like to add something on this point of different ways of development to the forest.
Yes, thank you, Daniela. Well, I had the chance to live for 14 years in the Amazon region, and so I'm glad to hear what Fabio just said, because I also agree that we have some experience that could be spread, and we need to look into the Amazon, if we are discussing development, as a landscape. As a landscape where we have forests, where we have people, where we have biodiversity, and we have different activities. And rather than discussing the next big project alone as a standalone issue, let's say a big road being paved or a new hydro dam in the region, we should consider what's the best combination of options that we could have for the region in order to provide development, to build the necessary infrastructure that we need, rather than discussing project by project and then losing a lot of time provoking a lot of impact, causing a lot of impact over the forest, of its biodiversity, and over local population, and going project after project to the next project, and discussing only in the, rather than thinking about the region as a whole, and thinking about the strategies such as and looking in the whole river basin, and thinking which are which are the different options, for example, in terms of energy generation. What are the options that we have in the region? If the plans are to build dozens and dozens of hydro dams, and why don't we connect the necessary increase in the supply of energy coming from hydro to other options that we have outside of the region as well, such as more wind energy, which is being expanding in Brazil, but we could have more. And why don't we also connect that to something that is not being well promoted and developed in Brazil, which is solar energy? These could provide solutions locally, can be helpful in order to provide local solutions, especially in the region as the Amazon, where we have really far away places and really far away communities. We need local solutions. Solar is one. We have oily species such as angiroba and other, which could provide local solutions to generate energy and substitute diesel generated diesel generators in the region. But also we thinking about Brazil, in order to provide energy for the growth of the country, we need to be more flexible and less, let's say, conservative, thinking about the way what are the different options that we can have to provide and to meet all the demands that the country will have in the coming years. We cannot just something that is urgent, that we need to stop discussing project by project. We need to look into the whole region and look at it as a big landscape with different elements. And as Fabio said, and as Professor Paulo also said, how to provide what is necessary and how to reduce and mitigate the impacts of the people and over biodiversity and ecosystem service and natural ecosystems.
Thank you, Carlos. Thanks a lot. Maybe we can go to the third block of our chat here and talk a little bit about the solutions. And Carlos was mentioning diesel that is used in the communities in the Amazon instead of maybe a solar panel or something like that. Professor Paulo, at the last IPCC, this one that was just released, there was a very clear advice that the world is burning fossil fuels in a scale that we never saw before in history. Maybe thinking about the forest and talking a little bit about solutions. What do you think? Is there hope? What can we do to address this situation? What is your point of view, like a scientist?
Yeah, in terms of solution, I think the message is very clear on this subject. The issue of Amazonian deforestation can be solved, as the government have shown, reducing deforestation from 25,000 square kilometers to 4,700 square kilometers in just 7 or 8 years. So this demonstrates to us that this can be done. This does not cost a fortune. So it's not a question of money issue. It's much more a question of governability into the Amazon region. And as Fabio mentioned in his previous talk, it's very important also to understand that there is not one single solution for Amazonia, but actually the solution for the Pará state will be different from the solution for Rondônia, will be different from solution from Acre, and will be different from solution from the Amazonas state. So the regionalization in Amazonia is very, very important feature, For instance, in the Amazon state, basically, only 2% of the forest in the Amazonian state was deforested. One of the issues that could help to keep this deforestation so low was the implantation of industrial sector that attracted people from the countryside to the Manaus city, so avoiding deforestation in the countryside, but on the other side, bringing a lot of difference in terms of income from poor workers and people working in the industrial sector of the Manaus Zona Franca. So basically, this was a model that was good up to now, but certainly needs to improve because there is a limitation of the Zona Franca of Manaus to attract people from the interior of the state of Amazonas, and a new model needs to be negotiated and needs to be implemented, for instance, in the Amazonas state. And the same with the Pará, the same with the Acre, and so on. And then basically one of the central points in the Amazonian region, as everybody was mentioning, is the issue of the energy production. And for sure, in the northeast part of Brazil, solar and also aeolic energy can play a much larger role. Decentralizing industry. So basically, this is a very important change in the Brazilian policy in terms of energy to displace resources that are being put into Amazonian big dams like Belo Monte into much smaller scale aeolic and solar plants in the northeast of Brazil, also displacing the industry from the south of Brazil, where it's very much concentrated, to the northeast of Brazil. In some way, this is already happening, but certainly could happen in a much faster pace. So I think that basically the message is the resolution for this issue does not cost a fortune, but will require a lot of coordination from the different levels of governments, from municipalities to state government and to the federal government.
Thank you, Professor Paulo. This is really very interesting because you mentioned the Amazon is almost as big as Europe, isn't it? Just to have an idea. Oh, we have another participant here. Hi, Daniel Neps. How are you? You join us at the very end of the chat, but it's very good to have you here. Maybe you can. Are you hearing us?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe you can introduce yourself and join us in this chat.
Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Nepstead, and I'm a scientist, one of the founders of EPAM, and now I run the Earth Innovation Institute. And I was a chapter lead author of one of the IPCC chapters that just came out.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Maybe we talked a little bit about the impacts of climate change over the forest, and we have an idea of an overlook of the problem and the treats. But as you are an expert on that, maybe you can talk a little bit what you are saying, what you're seeing in your last studies. In this IPCC report, there was a big issue about the impacts of climate change over the forest. So maybe you can mention it, because we didn't, I mean, you can add something on that.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's interesting because in the fourth assessment of the IPCC that came out in 2007, there was still a lot of modeling evidence that there was a large-scale forest dieback by the end of the century driven by climate change alone. And the main difference in the new report that just came out in our chapter was basically that the evidence for a climate change-driven Amazon forest dieback has actually grown weaker, but the evidence of a near-term, large-scale forest degradation has grown stronger. In other words, the combination of extreme drought, fire that escapes from land use activities, comes together to create events where for example, in 2007, 11,000 square kilometers of forest were severely degraded, worth more than 50% by combination of drought.
Daniel,
extreme events are really what.
Daniel, I can hear you. Yes, now it's good. Can you hear me?
Can you hear you? Yes.
Yes? Yeah, okay. So please, go on. Sorry.
Okay, I don't know how much of that you got, but
maybe
in
you are having some
late
issues
century, yeah, unfortunately, you would think a Hilton hotel would, but it doesn't.
Daniel, I think we are having some issues with your internet connection. I cannot hear you well. I'll try to ask something about. We were in the third block of our chat here, and we were starting to talk about solutions. So maybe we can, Carlos, can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, is there hope? What can we do to address the situation now? And can you join us, Daniel? Are you listening? No, Carlos, can you please add something on what Professor Paulo was saying before?
It seems to me that the first thing that we need is it's a plan. What we want in Amazon. Yes, we need policies. And we, as Professor Paulo said, according to those policies, we need governance. And this plan needs to be, from our point of view, highly sustainable, because the best choice that we could have for the Amazon is using this sustainably, protecting biodiversity and its biodiversity and protecting its ecosystems as necessary in order to avoid this keeping losing it and reaching tipping points mentioned by Fabio. And in order to have those, we need political will. We need to all the stakeholders working in collaboration, civil society, researchers, promoting some of the solutions and also the information that the science has been producing in order to influence governments to do what they are expected to do, especially the federal government, but as Professor Paulo mentioned, connecting and having a strong coordination between the federal government, the state level governments, and the local governments. So we need a plan, we need policies, we need governance, and we need political will. Hope we have a lot to gain from a sustainable development model being implemented in the Amazon. This would be good for biodiversity, this would be good for ecosystem services, it would be very good for local people, for the 30 million people that is mentioned, but also for the whole Brazil. We'll benefit a lot because we can profit more from a protected forest, from highly conserved forests, and from more well-developed and economic activities using best practices, rather than going through forest after forest, just clear-cutting it and discussing infrastructure and implementing infrastructure without all those elements in the table. But hope we have. Let's have political will. It's the first ingredient.
Okay, thank you, Carlos. Fabio, maybe you can. So it's not very easy. We need governance, we need political will, we need something new, and we need something that is very local and different from a place to another. So I don't know, can you mention some initiatives that are being implemented in Brazil to combat the destruction of the Amazon and can put some value in the forest? Because I think this is important as well. I'm not...
Yeah, yeah. I believe that there are many local solutions in place already. But as Paulo and Carlos mentioned, I think we do have a governance problem, and many of these solutions, oftentimes, they don't go beyond local level. One of the things that we've been doing at Conservation International, we have built a small center. We call it America's Center for Sustainability, and part of our job is to try and give scale to some of these solutions. So can one country learn from the next one? Can one municipality learn from the neighboring municipality? And it's interesting that somewhat spontaneously, some of this mutual learning is already happening. I see a number of initiatives that are taking place at country level. Ecuador has a program called SocialGood that basically gives incentives to farmers to keep their forests protected in the Amazon region, financial incentives. So it's similar to a payment for ecosystem service scheme. We like to call it conservation agreement scheme. And with that, these farmers, they receive some money. With this money, they are expected to use it for a number of things: education, health, and at the same time, they keep their forest standing. The government of Bolivia has learned a little bit from this experience. It has created a similar mechanism called Conserbo. And Conserbo started off in the state of Pando, that's the state with highest deforestation rate in Bolivia, and that from Pando moved upwards, and it's now a national policy. Brazil has a similar mechanism called Bolsa Verde that goes beyond Amazonia into other biomes as well, but a lot of Bolsa Verde municipalities are in the Amazonian state, which is basically further financial incentive to people who already received the Bolsa Familia grant, and they get a little bit of extra money if they live in the countryside and if they protect natural habitats inside their property. This type of mechanism, when they function well, they manage to simultaneously protect nature and improve the quality of life of people, oftentimes getting them away from poverty. So I believe that such mechanisms, and there are a number of them in the region that are out there. As I said, most of them do not have national scale yet, but I gave you just 3 examples of mechanisms that move from local initiatives to national scale programs. And I think this kind of thing came out a lot in the last IPCC report. And many scientists call that ecosystem-based adaptation. And I was very happy to see that throughout most of the IPCC chapters in the volume 2, ecosystem-based adaptation came out as a powerful set of potential solutions to some of the issues that we have in the Amazon, which is basically being able to reconcile nature conservation with human development. So I think these are, there are many out there, but I think there are some that have already moved from local scale to national scale, and we are trying to, working with our partners and with some of these governments, we are trying to go from national to regional. We do believe that due to the issue of leakage that we have mentioned earlier, we must have more of regional agreement between these governments to push forward some of these good local solutions to regional level.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Fabio. Maybe, Daniel, can we try again and you can try to answer this question?
Yes. Could you, I think we just...
Let's try again, yeah.
We just finished a paper that came out Friday in Science on Brazil's progress towards ending deforestation and or slowing it at least, and a few lessons. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, very good.
Okay.
Now it's fine.
I think a few lessons are that to achieve large-scale changes in rural development, such as what is taking place in the Amazon with a 70% decline in deforestation. It takes a combination of very strong governance initiatives from both federal and state level governments, you know, Pepe Sedan and the elevation of the deforestation issue, increase in law enforcement, access to rural credit conditioned upon the performance of the county that you're located in, the municipio. It takes those types of interventions together with private sector voluntary interventions such as the soy moratorium, which established a cutoff date beyond which you could no longer basically sell your soy. Together, those can create the conditions for a new rural development model. In isolation, I don't think either of them could. That said, what has taken place in the Amazon is quite fragile. It's fragile because, can you hear me?
Oh no, again, I can hear you more. Professor, oh yeah, yeah, oh. Professor Paul Artacho?
Yeah. Yeah, so basically I wanted to emphasize. Yeah, you hear me well?
Yeah, please.
I want to emphasize.
Yes, yes, it's
Daniel Nepstad's paper on science last Friday, because they make a very nice analysis of what were the drivers that brought down deforestation, because of course it's not just one single driver. Brazilian society is very complex. It's a mixture of economic incentives and also, of course, fiscalization helps a little bit, economic incentives help another way, but one of the main issue is actually it works better when the local government works with the state government and with the federal government. So that was the reason why I previously mentioned that the governance for me is a critical issue, but let's emphasize the issue of the economical instruments are very important. The issue of you don't buy big frigorificos, don't buy, let's say, meat from a certified farm, for instance, have a huge effect on reducing deforestation. So we needed to implement this for more products like soybean, you know, like rice and certainly wood that also has a good program in place, and enlarge these initiatives of economic incentives, and then we could keep deforestation at the level that is now between 4,000 and 5,000 square kilometers per year.
Okay, Professor Paulo, thank you. Daniel, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Would you like to? Yes. Now it's very good. Would you like to add something on what Professor Paulo was saying about your studies? We have already mentioned a lot of governance, and we were trying to talk a little bit about the. Maybe you can talk more about the drivers and solutions in your point of view.
Yeah, I will be very quick and simple. We need to happen in the Amazon what has happened in California, where I live. 30 years ago, you heard the word California wine, and you went, ugh, who wants California wine? Today, California wine is a good thing. It's got high quality. Today, if you talk about beef from the Amazon, you go, oh, I don't want that, because it's associated with deforestation. And we need to get to the point where, and I think we're moving in that way, where the Amazon is like California wine today. In other words, you know it's associated with good development. It's where you want to invest money. Because right now, too much of what's been accomplished in the Amazon has been accomplished on the basis of negative incentives. Exclusion, we don't want to buy your product because it's associated with deforestation. Let's impose restrictions on the farmers. And the farmers are fed up. They're bitter. They want to get on with their lives. And I would put that out there, that we need to create a positive agenda for the Amazon if we're going to achieve its potential in climate change mitigation, as well as a source of many other products.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Maybe now we have to do our final question and conclude this chat. Well, Daniel mentioned California, and maybe one question is, what can other countries outside of the region do to help in this situation? I know this is a sensitive question for Brazil, some sectors of the Brazilian society, but we have the Fundo Amazonia, we have a lot of examples of help of other countries, and I would like to know what you think about that. And if it's possible to have, in a few years, zero deforestation in the Amazon. So maybe Professor Paulo, you can start with our final questions and comments.
Paulo is on mute.
I cannot hear you. Yes.
I was with my microphone off. So basically, it's possible to have zero deforestation, and because, you know, if you use the right incentives, the right policies, long-term view, you certainly can do it. And then, but you raised an important issue. Amazonia is not just Brazil. We needed to have an engagement of the other Amazonian countries in a Pan-Amazonia initiative, and of course Brazil needs to have a lead on that, because deforestation is also an important issue in Peru, Bolivia, Guyana, and so on. So basically we need a coordination by the federal Brazilian government on the existing bodies. You don't need to create anything new, but you certainly needed to make these political international instruments related to the South America Amazonia initiative to make them to work. So basically, this is a very important issue, because the solution is not on the Brazilian side. Of course, you are the main partners, but if you stop completely deforestation of Amazonia, same pressure will start to happen in Peru, Bolivia, and so on. And we need a coherent structure and a coherent policy for all over Amazonian states.
Thank you, Professor Paulo. Fabio?
Yes, I agree with Paulo, and I think I believe very much in South-South exchange, and I think the Amazonian countries, they must work more together. And I'm beginning to see also some very good models and very good initiatives in Africa and also in Asia. Of course, there's great science power already also in the region, inside Brazil, inside other countries. So I think that there has to be a better linkage, a better dialogue between science and policy. And I believe very much in South-South exchange. We are not so much used to doing that, but some of what I have been seeing in recent years, I think it's very powerful, and basically we should be doing more of that. Thank you. And I got to thank you for that. I will have to leave. I'm sorry to rush, but I wanted to thank you once again, and I had a great time seeing some of my friends there on the screen. It's wonderful to see you, and I hope to be doing some more of that with you guys soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabio. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Bye. Carlos, would you like to make a final comment?
Yes, well, I fully endorse, and I won't repeat what others have said, but I fully endorse South-South cooperation. It's very important, but also we need some frameworks of policy that connect different instruments, and which can connect the Amazon Fund with other instruments, for example, those which foster the use of best practices in agriculture in the region right now. And also we need a national, let's say, strategy on RED, which is being running, discussions around that. We are running for 4 years in the country, and we still don't have a strategy, and we don't have a national system in place. Besides having state level strategies on RED and on reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. And so the type of collaboration that we have right now, either through the Amazon Fund or the funds and instruments, and also on scientific collaboration is between the Brazilian institutions and institutions from other countries, is critical to promote solutions and to have advance in the discussions and the debate around the mode of development and also the solutions to be implemented in the states, in the region. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you, Carlos. Thanks a lot. Maybe Daniel, your final point.
I will hope my connection is strong.
Yeah.
I had the privilege of meeting with Governor Jerry Brown of California 2 weeks ago, and he was very interested in what Brazil has achieved in the Amazon. I think there's a possibility there. California is the only potential market for carbon from emissions reductions. And I guess I would just say, I think that Brazil needs to be very pragmatic, as does Peru and Colombia and other Amazon states, to really plug the gap that we have now, which is a severe lack of positive incentives for the farmers, the communities, and the governments that are doing the right thing in the Amazon. So I think if that help comes from other countries that are in the north, I think we have to be open to that. There are not many games in town. We are not on the verge of a wonderful global integrated carbon market, unfortunately. And I do think, though, that the South-South collaboration, but also the collaboration between major private sector supply chains and civil society and government can come together. I think there's a prospect for a major deal by Paris in 2015 among Amazon countries, and we all need to pull together for that to come. I think Brazil, as it goes into the World Cup, can take great pride in not being just the world's best soccer nation, but the world's greatest climate change mitigating nation. And it has a moral high ground that it can stand on as it goes into the end of the year and into negotiations in Lima, which is, come on, Brazil has done its part. Let's get other countries to do their part and get other nations to put some money into this game. Thanks so much. I'm sorry I was so late to this, but I enjoyed what I was able to catch.
Thank you very much, Daniel. It was a pleasure to have you here. And thanks, everybody. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Professor Paul Artacho. It was we had a lot of inputs and very incredible and powerful ideas here. And thank you very much for this Google Hangout World Cup plus Climate plus Social Good event. See you later. Bye.
Thank you all for the coordination and the very nice and friendly discussion. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.